Let me just. Hey, good morning, everybody. Today's Daf Yomi is sponsored by Grace Warren Bolton in memory of her brother Bobby, her mother Beverly, and her father and her grandmother Grace. And we're going to start on the bottom of 24b. Today's Daf Yomi is Chagigah 25. We're going to start on the bottom of 24b, which is a beautiful Daf Yomi. I see Gray has joined us. We just said that the sponsorship the whole month was dedicated to your brother, your mother, and your grandmother. So the Mishnah tells us as follows, at the bottom of 24b, Chomer B'Truma Sheb Yehuda. Chomer B'Truma, that even though we have been discussing up until this time that the kachim, that the sacred food that was served that was part of the sacrifices in the temple, that was stricter than the truma. The truma was the also holy food, but it was less holy. That was the part that was given to the kohanim to eat as a tithe. That we were talking in the previous Mishnah about the 11 stringencies that the kachim is, that the sacrificial food is in 11 different ways, that it has more milos, it has more stringencies than the truma. But now this Mishnah is going to tell us the areas in which the truma is more stringent than the kachim. Chomer b'truma, these are the stringencies of truma over kachim. Shebi Yehuda ne'emanin al taras yayin v'shemen kol yemos hashana. Because in Judah, this is the area, the province of Judea, they were believed about their purity of their wine and their oil to give for kachim, for sacrificial food. If they sanctified their wine and oil to be used in the altar, they were believed on it the whole year. Meaning, because we had said this earlier, because if we weren't going to accept their wine and their oil, then we were worried that they were going to go ahead and make their own temples, and so therefore we accepted it. However, so in Judah, they were believed on it the whole year. But the whole year they weren't believed to give the tithe to the Kohen for the truma from their wine and their oil. The whole year we would say, no, we have to be concerned that maybe it was that the non-chaver, that the Amaretz, the person wasn't careful about his purity status, and he touched the wine and the oil and he made it impure. However, during the pressing season, when they would press the wine and the oil, then we believe that everybody was making sure that their utensils were pure, and then afa truma, and then we believe him about the truma, because otherwise, rabbis are going to explain. Otherwise, the non-kohanim would have the kohanim wouldn't have anything to eat, because they wouldn't be able to give the wine and the oil to the kohanim. And the Gemara says. So the Gemara says, Avru agitos va'abadim. Let's say the time of the pressing season passed. Ve'vilu chavish shel yayin shel truma, and then the Amaretz, the person who wasn't careful, tried to bring to the Kohen a barrel of wine of truma. And the Kohen was not allowed to accept it from him. But he would bring it to the pressing season, to the next pressing season. Meaning to say, the Amaretz would have to leave it for the next pressing season, and then he could give it to the Kohen. So this was only a dispensation during the pressing season that you could give it to the Kohen. Let's say the Amaretz says, Hifrashu utocha revius kodesh. Let's say the Amaretz says to the chaver, says, but I put in a kodesh. I put in some sacrificial wine in it. I put in a quarter lug of kachim that I've dedicated to the temple. I put in this barrel. Then we're going to believe him, because since we already said we always believe him about the sacrificial wines, and then we're going to also believe him about the wine he's giving to the Kohen, because it's mixed in together. Then the Mishnah says, Kadeh Yayim and Kadeh Shemen, the jugs of wine and the jugs of oil on top of 25a, Hamedumaos, which are mixed together. The Gemara is going to explain what that means, but at first glance, we assume that it means that you have the untithed food, the truma, and the truma mixed together. It means, say, you have the truma and the chulin, the sacred food that's given to the Kohen, mixed in with the untithed food, and you have that all mixed in together. We believe them, and when they say it's ritually pure, we accept it from them during the time of the pressing season. And also prior to the pressing season, 70 days. If they start preparing for the pressing season, 70 days prior to it. So the Gemara is going to ask the question. The Gemara says, what do you mean we believe them in Judea about their wine and their oil? when they want to give it to the temple for sacrificial food, be Yehuda in, be Galilee lo. Meaning we only believe them in Judea, but not in the Galilee. Why don't we believe them in the Galilee? So the Gemara says, my time, and what's the reason why we believe them in Judea, but not in the Galilee? What's the reason for that? Gemara explains, because in between the Judah and the area of Judea and the Galilee, there was the area of Judah and the area of the Galilee, there was a strip of land of the Kutim, meaning the idolaters, and that was dividing between these territories. And so therefore we have a principle that the area of the idolaters, the land of the idolaters, is a place of ritual impurity. And so therefore there'd be no way where we could get through, because it has the ritual impurity of a dead body. So there would be no way we'd be able to get the barrel of wine from the northern territory to the southern territory without going through the idolatrous land. And that's how it will become tamei. So Gemara says, but we have a good solution. Why don't we just put it in a box, which is enclosed on all sides, and that could stop the ritual impurity from coming in? Gemara says, well, no, we can't do that. Why? Hamani, this is the position of Rebbe, who says the ol zara klav shmei ol. This is the position of Rebbe, who says if it's a moving tent, that's not considered a tent to stop the ritual impurity. By the way, this is very relevant for today, because if we say a moving tent does not stop the ritual purity from going up, that's why we have problems today. Can you go in an airplane? Can you go over a Jewish cemetery if you're going on an airplane? Because you might think, well, I'm in an enclosed structure, so it's a tent. But since it's a moving tent, it's not considered a tent. So if you go over a cemetery, you're going to be considered like you're going over the dead body, a Jewish dead body. And if you're a Kohen, that's a problem, potentially a problem. And this is not a new question with airplanes. This was a question already when there were trains that used to go over Jewish cemeteries. This was a problem which the authorities had to deal with. That's why some, like the El Al, they used to make it so that they wouldn't fly over Jewish cemeteries. So some people are very careful only to take the El Al airplane because they wouldn't fly. And that's why you'll see some people have the position that they were on some airplanes, like trying to enclose themselves in entirely plastic enclosures as a way of trying to stop the ritual impurity coming up through the airplane and into them. But whether or not that's a good solution, you can look it up. If you Google, does putting myself in a full body plastic bag stop the ritual impurity from coming up? And people took this upon themselves as a way of that. But this is based upon this idea that a moving tent is not considered a tent. Tanya, as we go into the Bryce on 25a, let's say a person enters into the land of the idolaters, B'Sheda Tevel Migdal, and they're going in a box. They're going in a moving box. Rabbi Mitame, Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda Mitayar. Rabbi says it's Tameh, and Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda says it's ritually pure, because Rabbi says since it's a moving tent, it doesn't work to stop the purity, and that's literally an airplane today. So the Gemara says, well, okay, but why don't we bring the wine or the oil through a pottery utensil, which is completely enclosed? And we have a principle that a pottery utensil that's enclosed, the ritual tumah cannot penetrate it. So the Gemara says, Amar Rabbi Eliezer, no, that's not going to work, because we say, Shonin ein hekdesh nitzol b'tzameh pasil. Yes, that works for something that's not sacrificial food. But if it's sacrificial food, the principle of putting it in a pottery utensil will not save it. And how do we know that? Because we have a source. The source states, that the water of the red heifer, that's not saved when it's in this tzamid pasil. Doesn't that? But so more question is, how can you say that it's not saved? But we have a brayso which states that the red heifer's red heifer's ashes, are not preserved from ritual impurity if they are in a tzamid pasil, if they're in a pottery utensil. Doesn't this mean my lav a kodesh nitzel? But if it was just regular sacrificial food, it would be saved. And Moses says no. What it's coming to exclude is, hamayim shena mekudash and nitzel. If the water was that they wanted to use for the red heifer had not yet been sanctified, then it would be saved nitzol mitzamid pasil. Then it would be saved in this pottery utensil. So the Gemara says, but really, do you think that they never had the ability to bring down the water of the wine and the oil that they made in the Galilee and bring it to the temple without making it ritually impure? But didn't Ula teach us chavraya midacham begalila? So didn't we learn the principle that the chavraya, that they were chaverim, the people were careful about the laws of purity and impurity, they would actually be midach, and they would actually be preparing in a pure manner their wine and the oil for the altar in the Galilee. So they were doing that. So how would they be able to get it to the temple if they didn't? If they were preparing it, they would have to cross through this land. So they must have had a way to get it. So the Gemara says no. No, they were leaving it up there in the Galilee. And then they had a principle. They were waiting for Elijah to come, and Elijah would purify it. Can you imagine what these people were doing? They knew that there was no way to get the wine or oil that they were making in the Galilee to the temple, but still they were making it because he said, we're going to make this wine or oil in a state of ritual purity. And then Elijah the prophet will come any second. They had such a emunah, they had such faith that Elijah the prophet would come. And then they would be able to figure out a path. Elijah the prophet would show them a separate path that they could go on where there were no dead bodies, and they'd be able to get there and purify and bring their wine and oil to the temple to be used in a state of ritual purity. That's the incredible faith that they had that Elijah would come any second. And now we continue with what the Mishnah said, that during the time of the pressing, the Chagitos, during the time of the pressing, the whole year we believe them about the sacrificial food. We believe we take their wine and their oil to use it in the temple. But during the time of the pressing season, we would also believe them about their truma, about their gifts to the Kohanim. So we would accept their wine and their oil, but only during the pressing season. Gemara says, Viramini, Hagomer Zesa, but we have a contradiction because we have a text that states that when one's olives are being ready to be picked, Yeshayar Kupa Achas, he should leave aside one box, Vietnana La'ani Kohen, and give it to the poor Kohen. Means that you give the Kohen the olives before, you don't crush them up first, because you want to make sure that it's in a state of ritual purity. And so from here we see that you're not allowed to give it to the Kohen the tithe even during the pressing season. You have to leave it in its full status so it doesn't become capable of contracting tumah. So the Gemara explains, so we have a contradiction because our Mishnah says that during the pressing season you could give the oil to the Kohen, and here we're saying you can't. So the Gemara says, Lokasha haba charfi haba afli. So the Gemara says, no, it's not a difficulty. One is during the early harvest, and one is during the late harvest. During the early harvest, or people haven't yet harvested their olives, then you could just give it to the Kohen as pressed oil. It's no problem. But during the late harvest, where everybody else has already harvested it, then that time of the year is up. It's no longer considered the pressing season. And then you have to leave it in its status where it's not yet has not yet become capable of contracting tumah before you give it to the Kohen. So that's one answer. He says, like what? He says, he says, like the olives of your father's home. Meaning to say, and the way Rashi understands this is like that the olives of your father's season, they're harvested late. It was in Teaneck for Shabbos, and they have a magazine here called the Jewish Link of New Jersey. And so they have a lot of, ads and articles in it. But they had an article where somebody wrote a whole article about this phrase, like giving all the different ways that you could understand this phrase. A very difficult phrase, but we're just going to say over Rashi's explanation, which is that he says, like in your father's home, that they would do a late harvest, and so therefore you have to leave the olives in their full state before giving them over to the Kohen. So Rav Yosef Amar Begalil Hashem. Rav Yosef says, no, there's a different distinction. With that which it says that you can give the wine and the oil to the Kohen, that was in Judah, but that which it says that you have to leave it in its full status, unpressed, to make sure it wasn't capable of contracting tumah, that was in the Galilee, because there they weren't as careful. Because in Judah they were careful about the pure wine and the pure oil, but in the Galilee they weren't. So the Gemara says, Abaye challenges Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Yosef. It says, Avar Yarden Galileo, at the other side of the Jordan River in the Galilee, they're like Judah, and we believe them about their wine and their oil, that it's of a pure status. So the Gemara, but we don't believe that wine or in the oil when it's in the off season, but we believe them during the pressing season that they're pure. So why? So even in the Galilee, we should believe them. Gemara says, you know what, you're right. Okay, you're right. We'll go back to their initial assumption that it depends if it was the early part of the harvest or the late harvest. During the early harvest, we believe the Amahards and we accept the wine and the oil for the Kohanim, because otherwise the Kohanim are not going to get any wine and oil as truma. But during the late harvest, we don't accept it. The Gemara continues that our Mishnah has said that once the harvest has passed, and the pressing season has passed, and they bring a barrel of wine from the Amaretz, you don't accept it from him, but you tell him to save it for the next pressing season, and then you give it to the Kohen. So the Gemara says, Ba'ami name Rav Sheshes. They asked the following question from Sheshes, Amar v'kibla. Let's say the Kohen went ahead and accepted it. He wasn't supposed to accept it, but he went ahead and accepted it from the Amaretz. Is he allowed to leave the wine for the next pressing season and use it then? So when Rav Shesha said to the yeshiva bachar, so he asked him this question, he says, well, this is an open mission in the Mai. He says to him in the Suah, this is a mission in the Mai. We learned this. We're on the top of 25b. Chaver ba'ama arts sheyarshu asavim. Let's say you have two brothers. One is very careful about the laws of purity. He's called a chaver. The other one is an amaretz. He's not careful. Sheyarshu asavim. They both inherited their father, and their father was an amaretz, and they inherited him. Sheyarshu asavim amaretz. Yachol omarlo. So one brother could say to the other brother, one brother could say to him, you take the wheat and I'll take this wheat. You take that wheat, I'll take this wheat. Or and you could say, you take that wine and I'll take this wine. But you can't say you take the wet one, which became capable. We've already learned once a food item has become wet at one point in its life, then it's capable of contracting tamei. So you can't say to the Amaretz, listen, you're not careful about these laws anyway. You take this stuff that's wet, because who cares if you're going to make it tamei anyway? I'll take the dry stuff because it'll never become tamei. You can't say that, because you're causing him to sin. Even though you know he's going to not be careful, you're then going to cause him to sin and serve other people the ritually impure food. And you can't do that, even though you're religious, so to speak, and he's not. So the Gemara says, and you also can't say, and you take the wheat and I'll take the barley, because within one food item, you're allowed to say, you take this and I'll take that. And we could say that's what the father meant to give you. But he wouldn't give one person wheat and one person barley. He would say, you take half the wheat and the other one takes half the wheat. So within the wheat item, you could say, I'll take this place and that place. But you can't say, I'll take the kosher ones and you'll take the non-kosher ones, so to speak. You can't say that. So the Gemara says, but why? Well, why can't we do this? Amai, why wouldn't we be able to say, Yanichana Gataba? So why, but why can't we say, even if you get the ones that are capable, basically tamei already, why can't you say you'll leave it for the next pressing season and then use it then? So from here we see that the Kohen can't leave it for the next pressing season. So the Gemara says, no, that's not a proof. We're talking about something, we're talking about something that doesn't have a pressing season. If it would be a pressing season, then you would have had a good solution. Just leave it for the next pressing season. We're talking about something like dates, which don't have a pressing season. So why don't we just leave for the holiday? And we said we're going to say that during the holidays, the rabbis suspended these laws, and they all of a sudden believed that the Amaretz was good, because we didn't want people to be too turned off during the holidays. We want the Amaretz to be able to eat with us in Jerusalem. So during the holidays, we say all the Amaretz are actually ritually pure. Tremendous novel teaching. So why don't we say, let's just leave this for the holidays? The Gemara says, no, but it wouldn't last. It wouldn't be preserved for that long. So now we're to the next piece. That if the Amaretz had said when he gave him the truma, gave him a barrel of wine, you're not allowed to accept it from him. But if the Amaretz says, if he says, I put a quarter lug of wine in it that I'm going to be using for the temple, well, now since you're allowed to believe him that stuff is pure, then for sure you could believe him that the other stuff is pure. That's the concept. By adding something into it, you purified everything. So it's a special idea. So the Gemara cites a Mishnah that we learned in Psachim, which it talks about as follows. Let's say I'll just give you a little background. You know that a Kohen is not allowed to come in contact with a dead body, but really anybody who's going to serve in the temple also can't come in contact with a dead body, because then you're going to be ritually impure and you're going to have to wait 3 days and then 7 days where you sprinkle the ashes of the red heifer upon you, the water, the mechatos, the water of the mixture of the red heifer's ashes. But let's say you need to get to Jerusalem to bring the Paschal lamb. You have to pass through what's called a field called the Beis HaPras. This is a field where you're not sure if there was a dead body there at one point, then it became plowed over. You don't know where the dead body is exactly. So what do? So there is a method to get through. What's that method? That you blow on the ground, because if the dead body is cut up into small pieces, at that point, you're only going to become tamei if you touch it, not if the pieces are small enough. You're not going to become tamei if you lean over it, which is called a tent over it, but it's only if you touch it. So we allow you to go through that field by blowing on the ground in front of you as you go and making sure that you're not actually touching a dead body. Let's say fan on the ground, so that way you don't touch any dead bodies. That way you can get through the territory. So this is what the introduction to the next piece, because the Gemara says Tanan Hasam, we learned over there, Modim Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel, both Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel agree, Shebodkin Ose Pesach, that we allow this method of walking through the field by blowing on the ground. We allow it for somebody who has to bring the Paschal lamb, because otherwise, if you don't let him get through this field, he won't be able to get to Jerusalem, and then he won't be able, and you could have to bring this Paschal lamb at a specific time. So we allow you to blow on the ground to get through. But we don't allow this if you're going to eat the truma. To eat the truma, we don't allow it. Why not? Because the truma is fundamentally different. Because since there's no specific time for you to eat the truma, we'll say, okay, if you went through this field, then just get the ashes of the red heifer sprinkled upon you, and you'll be purified. So we only allow for the Paschal lamb, but not for the person who wants to eat truma. And what does it mean, bodkin? What does this mean? You check. You blow on the ground before you walk to get rid of the dead bodies. Rabbi Chagigah bar Abba says in the name of Ula Amar Beis Aprash Nidosh Tar Ose Pesach. Rabbi Chagigah bar Abba says in the name of Ula, this field which had a dead body on it, which was plowed over, we're going to say it's richly pure for those who need to bring the Paschal lamb, and we allow the people who are bringing the Paschal lamb to go through such a field, because otherwise they won't be able to bring it. And he explains that what's the reason? Because if you don't bring the Paschal lamb, you're going to get kares, you're going to get the severe penalty from heaven. Therefore, the rabbis didn't say this rabbinic law that you can't walk through such a field that was plowed over because maybe there's a dead body there. But for those who want to eat truma, and if you eat truma while you're in a state of ritual impurity because you walked over this dead body, Misa. There, since you get death from heaven by eating truma in a state of ritual impurity, the rabbis established that you shouldn't walk through this field. So now the Gemara asks this question. We're going to bring it back to our Mishnah. Okay, the Gemara asks the following question: we allowed you to go through this field because you need to get to the Jerusalem to eat your Paschal lamb. So you come to this field, you blow on the ground, you walk through. It's okay for a Pesach, but it's not okay for a truma. But let's say we allowed you to do it for the Pesach. Oh, now that once you're in, oh, now look, I went through the field. I'm not tamei. Now I eat truma also. That's the question the Gemara is asking. Or do we say no? It was only an exemption good for Pesach, but not for truma. Or do we say, well, if you're either one or the other. If you're pure, then you can also eat the truma. If you're not pure, then you can't eat the Pesach. So Ula's answer is So Ula says, well, since you became qualified for the Paschal lamb, you're also allowed to eat the truma. Whereas Rabbi bar Ula says, Ula's son, Rabbi bar Ula says, so it seems like Ula's son is arguing with him. He says, if you check for the Pesach, you can't eat the truma. So who's Saba? So there was an elder there, and who argues. This elder says, "Lo tifol goei de Ula." Don't argue on that ruling of Ula, the Tanan Kavasi, because our Mishnah over here is just like him. Because what does the Mishnah say? That if you put, even though the wine and the oil we otherwise wouldn't be able to eat if it comes from an Amma Aretz, not during the pressing season. But if you say, look, I put into it a revius of Kodesh, I put into it a quarter lug of sacrificial wine, then we believe him. Neman, we believe him. Since we believe him about the kachim, we also believe him on the truma. So too here also, since we believe him about the kachim, we also believe him about the truma. Okay, so then the Mishnah had said that if you have the jugs of wine and the jugs of oil, which are mixed in together, which are mixed in medumaos, we believe them during the time of the gitos. So what does this mean? Tana, we have some very strange laws here. He says, so the Gemara says we learned the Amei Aretz are not believed about the jugs and not about the truma. So what does that mean? Kankanim, when we say we don't believe them about the jugs, kankanim demai. Which jugs do we not believe them about? Kankanim de kodesh. If you want to say it's the jugs of the sacrificial food, can't be the sacrificial wine and sacrificial oil. We do believe them. Migu de Mehemen HaKodesh, Mehemen Namani HaKankanim. Since we believe them, the wine and the oil for the temple, we believe them. So for sure, we should believe them about the jugs that are in it. So it must be the Kankanim de Truma, the jugs for the Truma. Pshita, it's obvious. Hasha Truma, and we don't believe the Amar. It's about the tithe, the wine and the oil for the tithe when it's not during the pressing season. Well, if we don't believe about that, of course, we're not going to believe about the jugs that are in it because they're holding the ritually impure jugs. Ela berekonim de kodesh. So we're talking about the empty jugs of the sacrificial of the temple oil. Ubashar Yemos Hashana, and we're talking about it during the rest of the year. Meaning to say that after they already poured, they're bringing you the wine and the oil for the temple. You take the wine and the oil, which is pure, because you accept their wine and their oil, and you pour it into your vessels in the temple. But then we say, but your jugs are no longer pure, because the exemption only gave you the permission for us to accept your wine and your oil, but your jugs are no longer ritually pure. That's this tremendous contradiction idea. It's this contradictory idea, but we need to accept the wine and their oil, but we only extend it to the wine and the oil. The wine and the oil was just in their jugs. Still, it doesn't extend that far. And also the Malayan de Truma b'shas akitas. And the same thing goes for their wine and their oil, for Truma wine and oil during the time of the pressing. Meaning we accept their wine and their oil for Truma, but we don't accept their jugs. And Gemara says, but let's challenge this let's challenge this Brisa from our Mishnah, because what does our Mishnah say? Tanan kadayim kadeshem hamidu maos, that the jugs of wine and the jugs of oil which are mixed together, that are believed, and we say that those are going to be not considered to be tamei. So the Gemara says, and what is this referring to? Ma'alav medu maos to truma. Aren't we talking about that they're mixed with truma, and so therefore that they have the word medumaos usually refers to where you have truma and tevel, truma and untied produce mixed together. And it seems from our Mishnah that we believe the jugs under those circumstances, that the jugs are not ritually impure. So Amar Rabbi Chia, no, the medumaos here refers to the kodesh. It's the jugs of the kodshim. That's what we're referring to. So Gemara says, what are you talking about? Is it really possible that we do al kodesh? This word meduma is usually a reference to chulin and truma mixed together. It's not a reference to sacrificial food for the temple. So I'm already debating Rabbi Elai, but Mataras Tivol, he told me no, we're talking about a circumstance where you have your wine and your oil, and you want to use it for all things. You're saying where you have right now it's tevel. We're going to eventually and it's mixed in with chulin, and we're keeping it a ritually pure status because we eventually want to take the libations from it. So therefore, there is this mixture of the non-sacred with the sacred. So therefore, we're going to believe you in that circumstance. And then the last piece that we'll do today is it says that they would take the wine and the oil. It would be clean during the pressing season if the Amorites would bring it. And when does the pressing season start? It starts 70 days prior. It says prior to the actual pressing season, 70 days. Kodem Lagitos, before they bring it into the wine press, 70 days before the grapes enter into the wine press. So Amar Abaye Shmamina Dinahu Dilu Ariso Mitra Chagulfe Shivim Yomin Mikmei Matzarta. So this teaches us a law that if you have a sharecropper, he has to start preparing his barrels 70 days prior, 70 days basically prior to the crushing of the grapes. They have to start preparing. So if you have this person and you have a deal with him that he has to be the sharecropper, when does he have to start doing his work, his preparation? 70 days prior. So that's today's teaching. But we see from your fundamental idea, very important idea. What's the upshot? That the rabbis, even though they're very careful about the laws of ritual purity and impurity, they did make two major concessions. One, they accepted all the wine and the oil for the temple because they realized if they were too strict, then the idolaters are going to go make their own temple. And so therefore you have to be flexible. And number two, they accepted it during the pressing season for the Kohen, because otherwise the Kohen would get no wine and no oil from the majority of the Jewish people. And we see from here that even though it's incredibly important to be careful about these laws, we have to know how to be flexible under certain circumstances. And this has relevance for how we think about kosher today, because the laws of purity and impurity were really they thought about the laws of purity and impurity the way we think about kosher dietary laws today. And so therefore, we think about the implications for our modern lives. Be happy to take any questions if people have any questions.